Hello and welcome. My name's Ben Hales with Transform My Poker. Today it's all about squeezing, so I've got my stress relief ball here. Deep breath and squeeze and just feel the tension disappear. And enough of that. I'm a poker coach. Let's talk about squeezing properly. I've got quite a few slides today, so let's kick off by defining what squeezing is. Some of you will be aware, others of you will not. But today you're going to learn everything there is to know about squeezing, starting with the definition. So squeezing is a pre-flop re-raise, a pre-flop 3-bet. And it takes place under the specific conditions where there's a raiser and one or more callers in between the raiser and you. And what effectively you're doing is putting the squeeze on the caller or callers. This move is usually a type of bluff. You can squeeze as a value move, but normally it's a kind of a bluff or a semi-bluffing move. Now I want to talk to you about the types of opponents that are needed in order for a successful squeeze play. So this is really important. This is where you need to pay attention, because attempting this with the wrong types of opponents is one of the biggest reasons why it goes wrong, okay? So look out for a loose pre-flop raiser. Nothing more important than that. You've got to have a loose pre-flop raiser. He's got to be playing a wide range, and ideally, he's got to be capable of folding. You also want callers who are routinely doing too much calling. So they've got lots of cards in their range. They're not always holding quite strong hands. So you don't want tight callers in between, because they're much more likely to call your squeeze play if you make it. Both or all villains should be capable of folding to a 3-bet. So this takes calling stations out of the equation. You want loose pre-flop players, but you want them good enough that they're capable of folding when you make your big raise. It's very, very important that your villains fit into these categories. So even in the first two slides, we've defined a very specific type of play. It's only going to come up now and again when you're able to make a squeeze play, and very specific types of opponents that you're looking for in order for this to be successful. So hopefully you're not doing this every other hand, right? You've got to be looking at this as maybe 1 in 100 or 200 hands, that type of frequency. Okay, so bet sizing wise, if you are choosing a 3-bet squeeze size as a bluff, you're normally going to want to err on the side of big, not small. You want to make them fold a high frequency. So in order to make them fold, you're going to have to invest some chips. If there's one caller between the raiser and you, multiply the initial raise by at least 4. Okay? If he raises 3 times the big blind, you're going 12 minimum. Okay? You're not messing around with 7 or 8 or 9. You're going to 12 or 13 or even 14 or 15. If there's 2 callers, multiplied by 5, 3 callers multiplied by 6, the raise sizing can get huge. It needs to be that big. Don't play around with smaller raise sizes unless you're going for value, unless you're holding aces and you're looking for the action. And ideally, you should have the same raise size for your value hands and your bluffing hands, okay, to avoid giving away any information through bet sizing tells. The next point on this slide, if all in makes more sense, choose all in. I see this is a frequent mistake that players make, where they'll make the squeeze play, but they'll not realize that they're committing half of their stack, and they really need to make a decision. Whenever you're putting in more than a third of your stack pre-flop, you normally need to think about whether it might be more sensible to go all in, or choose a different action. So maybe choose flat call or maybe fold instead. Sometimes all in has to happen, and it might be an uncomfortable amount, but sometimes it's the right play. So for tournament players in particular, all in squeezes can be very, very useful. It's a very effective way of playing out of the blinds in particular. And for cash game players, you're normally going to be able to go with the recommended sizings. You're not going to need to worry about all in plays because you're playing deep stacked enough. Okay, the next topic I want to talk about is your image. Your image is important for making squeeze plays. If you're already viewed as being quite a loose player capable of making lots of bluffs pre-flop and post-flop, you're not going to be able to get as much credibility when you make your squeeze play. Ideal conditions are when you've been quite tight, and there may be a range of different moves you're thinking of making pre-flop. You've been very, very tight, you've folded lots of hands. The squeeze play is ideal because people are going to believe you've got a big hand if they've not seen you playing much pre-flop. So yeah, if you've got a tight image, this might be the type of time to pull out the squeeze play. Don't do it too often. If people see you making this play 3 or 4 times in 40 or 50 hands, they're going to start realizing that you're bluffing and you're going to get called off lighter. Position on the table is definitely something to think about when squeezing. The big blind is the best place to do it because you're seeing what everybody else does pre-flop, and then you're making your decision. So you've got the most pre-flop information when you make your big 3-bet. Small blind's also a good place to do it from, and you're utilizing your positional advantage pre-flop when you do it from the blinds. If you do it all in from the blinds, it's especially good because you use your pre-flop advantage and negate the disadvantage of having to play post-flop out of position. So it's kind of doubly good for all-in squeeze plays. Whenever you are squeezing, you want to avoid too many active opponents. So if you're trying to squeeze from, say, mid-position or the cutoff, you've got quite a few active players sat behind you who are still to act. That's a problem because you've got to think about all the active opponents in the hand. You've got the raiser, the caller or callers, and then also these active players behind. So making any kind of a bluff through 5, 6 active hands could be considered somewhat reckless. So I would stick to button, small blind, and big blind for your squeeze plays, especially the blinds. Now, in this video, I'm not focused on hands. Squeezing is about opportunity spots. It's not so much focused on hands. However, I will give you some guidance. You want to have some value hands in there. So obviously, don't never squeeze with your premium hands. You want to be 3-betting with these hands too. Hands with some decent equity like King Queen do quite well. They're not in that much trouble against lots of hands. There's only 5 hands that King Queen's in big trouble against. So it's quite a safe hand to commit lots of chips with. And so if you've got lots of fold equity, it also holds reasonable equity if you end up all in. Semi-bluffing hands are also useful, perhaps more so in deep stacked spots. And total bluffs are okay when the conditions are perfect. So what we're talking about here is we're saying our showdown equity isn't important because we're going to make them fold really, really often. And that can take place, especially in tournaments if you're chip leader and you're applying pressure on the right opponents who are going to have to fold really, really high frequencies. So there's some guidance on the types of hands that you may choose to squeeze with. I'm going to end the video with an example, and The example is a very, very typical squeezing spot. No hands, just a spot. Cash game, deep stacked. Heroes on the big blind. Villain 1 is a loose, aggressive player, and he raises to 3 big blinds. Could be 4 big blinds, but he raises, okay? And then you've got someone in between you and the raiser who flat calls. And this villain is probably loose. In this example, I'm not labeling the second villain because I think the most important thing is that the raiser has a loose range of hands. And then what happens is it comes round to you on the big blind and you 3-bet to 12 big blinds. So you're choosing 4 times the initial raise size. And they both fold. So this is the outcome that you're going for. You're looking to make them both fold. If one of them calls, a continuation bet is going to work a really high percentage of the time. I hope you enjoyed my video on squeezing. If you did, do your like thing down below. Please leave a comment, leave a question. I'll be happy to get back to you and answer any questions you may have. My name's Ben Hales with Transform My Poker. Thanks for listening.